Hey, I'm Mike and you're watching Ask AutoAnything, where you ask us your automotive questions or whatever you want. How do spark plugs work? How can I bleed my brakes by myself? Am I wearing pants? Ha, made you look. All this and more coming at you. Our number one most asked question is, what do spark plugs do? Now, spark plugs play a vital role in producing power out of your engine. Now, it doesn't sound like much because it's such a small part, but the spark plugs are very important. Now, the spark plug screws into your cylinder head, and what it does is it sparks. And the reason why this is important is because the fuel and air mixture that gets shot into your cylinder, this is what sparks it and actually ignites it and creates that combustion, which is what makes power. Now, the spark plug gets its spark from the ignition coil. The ignition coil sends the voltage through, lights the spark plug, it sparks, it ignites the fuel in the air, it creates the combustion, and then from there it pushes the piston down and turns the crankshaft, and there's a huge run of things that go on from here, but it in turn creates the power out of your engine. Our next question is, what are coilovers? Now, coilovers are a performance-oriented suspension type. Your standard suspension is a strut with a coil spring that's around it, and a coilover is also a coil spring over a strut. So they sound pretty similar right off the bat, but they actually are very different. Now, when you step into a coilover for your type of suspension, be it a car or a truck, you're getting greatly improved valving, greatly improved performance characteristics, and a lot more adjustability and tunability out of a coilover. You can adjust and control the rebound, the dampening. If you really get into it, you can tear it apart and change the internal valving, which is going to make a huge difference. But another great feature to a coilover is that you can change the coils themselves. So with a coilover, it typically comes with a higher spring rate right off the bat, and a different spring rate or higher spring rate or heavier spring rate, however you want to look at it in that manner. It requires more force to compress that coil spring. Now, with a car, for example, oftentimes that's used to improve the cornering characteristics. It sort of takes away from the day-to-day ride comfort, but when you're investing into a performance set of coilovers, you want that traction at the tires when you need it, and coilovers really do a great job at providing that. They also allow you to adjust the ride height. So with that coil spring, there's going to be a collar at either the bottom or the top, and you can either adjust it up or adjust it down by adding or removing preload to that coil spring. And that preload is how much pressure is on it in its static, unweighted form. Now, by adding more preload, you can actually raise the ride height, or if you remove some of that preload, you can lower the ride height. So that's a huge advantage for cars. When you go into the truck world with performance coilovers, because trucks can get performance coilovers too, oftentimes you'll be adding more preload to add more lift to your truck. Same kind of things go on. There's improved valving, improved rebound and compression dampening options. You have the ability to change the coil spring. So for example, on my own truck, I have a set of coilovers, and I went to a heavier spring rate because I have added stuff onto my truck, like a steel bumper, a winch, sliders, and skid plates. All that added weight that went onto it, it made for a better advantage for the ride out of the front suspension by going to a heavier spring, so that way it takes more effort to compress that spring, so it has a firmer ride characteristic to it. Another great advantage to coilovers is the improved cooling. Chances are they're going to be a larger diameter body than the factory suspension on your ride, and that allows for more oil and more nitrogen to be within that body. And by having more oil, it takes longer for it to get overheated, and once your oil is overheated, you experience shock fade, where the actual shock, the coilover, the shock inside of it, isn't performing the way that it's supposed to. The oil cavitates and there gets air into it, and it's not going through the valve shims as it should be. So huge advantages in ride characteristics, performance, the adjustability, and of course the longevity, because they'll last longer, performing harder under high heat, and you can rebuild them, make them new again, and they can last the lifetime of your vehicle. Our next question is how much to lift a truck? Now this is kind of a two-part question since it wasn't really clarified. Is it how much to lift your truck in terms of height, or how much to lift your truck in terms of a cost? So I'll sort of touch on both for you here. Now, in terms of cost and height, typically the cost of it is going to go up as you increase the height. Typically there's going to be more components, more pieces involved with these larger lift kits. Now, for how high you should lift your truck, as in the height of it, you have options with simple body lifts, leveling kits, full-blown lift kits, and really there's ranges that you can go from just an inch or two to just eliminate that factory rake versus bringing your truck all the way up into the air. Now, at the end of the day, this really comes down to personal preference and how you want to use your truck and how you want it to look. For my own truck, I went with a 3-inch lift, and that was 3 inches in the front and about 2.5 inches in the back. So there's still a little bit of rake, although there's not much left with the camper shell on due to the spring rates of the leaf springs. Now, the reason why I went with a 3-inch lift is because I wanted to keep the center of gravity lower. That was one aspect to it, so that way when you're on the trail and you start getting off camber, your height or your center of mass still remains at a little bit lower of a center of gravity. That helps keep you planted and controlled on the ground. Other reasons why you might want a 3-inch lift is, you don't want it to be too tall. Some people have garage concerns to worry about or parking structures. And if you go too high, obviously that can be an issue there. With these lower lift kits, lower in terms of height, there's options from like a Bilstein 5100 to an iBox system to Icon, Fox, King, ReadyLift, SuperLift. Tons of different brands out there that all cover this sort of 2-3 inch range category. And what's great about it is it brings your truck up enough that it really sets it apart from a stock truck. It is distinguishable even though it's only a couple of inches. It gives you room for larger tires, more aggressive wheels, so you can start to stance your wheels out a little bit. You can even push them out further and run some bigger oversized fender flares and really make a dramatic change to the look of your truck. Now with the taller lifts, 4-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch, you're really starting to change a lot of the suspension components. Now there's full drop bracket lift kit options that, it relocates where your front differential is located. A lot of different parts that are involved with these larger height lift kits. So they do make for a more involved installation, and it does add to the cost of everything. But it will really make a dramatic change to your truck at the end of the day. If you park a stock truck next to a 3-inch lift height truck versus 6-inch versus 12-inch, it's very noticeably different between these different heights. Now, when you do start going to these taller heights, obviously you can fit bigger wheels, bigger tires, make it more aggressive, and really show more of a presence when you have those 6-inch lift or taller trucks. And something else to take in consideration when you do lift your truck that high is when you go to a tire that's so much larger than stock, oftentimes you'll want to re-gear your differentials. Now that would involve the gear set in just the back if you're a 2-wheel drive, or the rear and the front if you're in a 4-wheel drive vehicle, because the gear ratios front to back always have to match. And the advantage to doing that is it's going to give power back to your ride after installing larger tires, can help bring your speedometer back into the right range, but there's also speedometer recalibrators and things like that out there for you too. So there's a lot of variables when it comes to how tall you should be lifting your truck or how high you should lift it. Again, a lot of it comes down to your preference, what you're comfortable with, and the end goal of what you want your truck to be. Again, with cost, with a simple leveling kit or a 2 to 3 inch lift, those things can range anywhere from about $150 all the way up to nearly $3,000, depending on how involved and how invested you want to go. With the 4, 5, 6-inch lift kits or more, oftentimes you'll be looking at pricing around $1,200 to $1,500 on the low end, but on the high end of things, it can get rather expensive because you can still get really nice performance coilovers and have the most amazing ride on and off-road, but also be 6-8 inches in the air. And those lift systems can end up being around $4,000 to $5,000. It can get pretty pricey to get that well into it. But tons of options in between. You don't have to go crazy, you don't have to stay mild. Lots of customability when it comes to lift kits and how tall you should lift your truck. Now on to a tough one, how to bleed your brakes by yourself. Now, bleeding brakes can seem like a really challenging piece of maintenance to do because you're working on the braking system of your vehicle. But it's really not all that hard when you get down to it. There's just some precautions that you want to take to make sure that you're doing it the right way. Because if you do make a mistake, it can result in having to do the whole job over again, which is always a bummer. Now, the most important thing is to not bring any more air or contaminants into your braking system. And a great way to go about bleeding your brakes and doing it by yourself without making this be a problem is to keep vacuum the whole time. So the first step and the first thing that I tend to do is you can use a bucket, or what I like to use is a water bottle, and fill this water bottle about halfway up with brake fluid. Now, the reason why you do this is because the hose or the line that you're going to connect to the caliper, you want to keep it submerged in this brake fluid. That way, when you release off of the brake pedal and it's inhaling back in, it's sucking up brake fluid and it's not bringing in any air or contaminants. So that's the first step. The next step that you're going to do is pop the hood and locate your master cylinder. Now, why you want to do this is because you need to keep the master cylinder topped off and full of fluid at all times. And again, this circles back to not bringing in any more air or any other contaminants into your braking system. Because again, you do that, you got to start all over and flush the whole system through. Now, another advantage here is when you pop open the lid, you can also check and inspect the fluid and make sure it's not dirty or in need of a complete flush. What you'll notice on your brake master cylinder is a minimum and a maximum line. And what you want to do is make sure that your fluid never dips below that minimum line. You can fill it all the way up to max. Even at the beginning, you could fill it a little bit above the max line, but it's not the best practice. You do want to keep it between that minimum and maximum level. Again, we want to keep a vacuum. We don't want to bring any more air into the system. You just want to flush out the air and contaminants that are in it. Now, the next step that you're going to do is locate the bleed screw on your caliper. Now, oftentimes this will be on the back side of the caliper, and it'll often have like a rubber or a plastic protective cap over it just to keep it clean and again prevent any contaminants. What you're going to do here is, back from step one, when we took that water bottle or a bucket or whatever you're going to use that's about half full of brake fluid with that clear line, you're going to take that clear line and connect it to the bleed screw. From there, you only want to crack that bleed screw open about 1/4 of a turn. Now, this is important because again, we don't want to introduce any air into the system. So by cracking it about a 1/4 turn or so, it allows for brake fluid and air to escape out of your braking system, but it prevents air from getting back in through, around that screw through those threads. So if you keep the line tight onto that bleed screw, only crack it about a 1/4 of a turn, and it's submerged in that brake fluid, you're going to be good to go. From here, you can start bleeding the brakes. And what you're going to do is hop in your ride and pump the pedal a few times. Now, the reason why you want to do it just a few times is because, again, you don't want that master cylinder to drop below that min line. You want to keep enough fluid in your master cylinder that it doesn't drop below, so that way it doesn't introduce more air into your system. So go ahead and pump the brakes, check your master cylinder, check the drain bucket or drain bottle that you're using. And what you're looking for is air bubbles. So ideally, in that bottle, you're gonna see a few air bubbles that are in there, and that means you're working in the right direction. Because again, you wanna flush that air, flush any contaminants out of your system, and once you stop seeing bubbles is when you know that you're done. So pump the brakes, top off the master cylinder with fluid, make sure that your line is submerged, pump the brakes some more, top it off, make sure your line's submerged. And again, once you stop seeing bubbles, you're done with that caliper, and you can move on to do the next 3. Now, our next question is, what is a catback exhaust? And to put it simply, a catback exhaust is an exhaust system that installs after or behind the catalytic converters. So since it's back from the cats or back from the catalytic converters, this is why it's called a cat back exhaust system. Now, to kind of touch on what's great about cat back exhaust systems is it's a great way to not only improve the sound of your vehicle, but improve the performance as well. So the benefits that you're getting out of a cat back exhaust system are going to be a larger diameter and mandrel bent exhaust piping. And what's important about this is it's less restrictive to the flow of exhaust to get it from intake all the way to exhale out the exhaust tip. Having that larger diameter and mandrel bent tubing makes a nice, smooth way for that exhaust gas to flow out the back. And if you're unfamiliar with it, mandrel bent means as it makes a corner, it stays keeping that same consistent diameter all the way through. Oftentimes with stock exhaust or some lesser expensive off-brand exhaust systems, what you'll notice is as it makes a corner, they pinch the exhaust tubing to make that corner, and then it opens back up to the regular diameter. So you have these crush points or pinch points where the exhaust is then going to slow down to go through that part, and then it can speed back up again afterwards. So it slows the whole system down. So upgrading to a cat back exhaust system is great for both the sound of your vehicle as well as the performance. Our next question is, how much horsepower does a cold air intake system add? Now this question is very variable because it's going to be dependent upon what kind of vehicle you have and what kind of air intake system that you're installing. But the main purpose of a cold air intake system, of course, is for power. There's a few other added benefits like this cleanable and reusable air filter, which filters out particulates much better than most factory air filters. So that's a great advantage right there. With this cold air intake system, it's designed to source cooler and more oxygen-rich air from outside the engine bay. Because your factory air intake is located up in the engine bay, and chances are it's pulling in that warmer, hotter air that's been heated by the engine. So by sourcing this cooler or cold air, being that it's colder, it's denser, which holds more oxygen, and through the whole grand scheme of things, more oxygen to mix with your fuel makes for more combustion, a more powerful combustion inside your cylinder. And that's really where you're getting your horsepower from. Now, oftentimes, smaller displacement engines are going to see in the neck of the woods of 5-10 horsepower. Larger displacement engines, V6s, V8s, V10s, you can see in the neck of the woods between 10 to up to 25 horsepower. Now again, this is variable. I mean, I gave you a huge range from 5 to 25, so what's going to work for my car? The best thing that you can do is do your research and do your homework when you're looking at the specific air intake systems. Oftentimes they'll include an estimated horsepower gain or a dyno chart or something associated with it to give you a great idea of what's going to come to your vehicle with your intake system. But again, intakes are great because they do improve your power, they do source cooler, more oxygen-rich air, and oftentimes you're actually going to see better fuel economy out of a cold air intake system as well. Our next question is, what does a performance chip do? Now this is a really fun one because they can do so much. Now there are inline chips that you can install that are, for lack of a better word, static. You set it up and it's pre-programmed to your vehicle and what's done to it, your engine and different modifications, things like that. And it reprograms the computer to perform better for you. So you take your stock vehicle, you add an intake, exhaust, headers, a few different miscellaneous modifications. Then you can take this inline chip, it's tuned for your setup, for your modifications, plug it in, and it's already ready to go to improve the performance of your vehicle with your modifications. Now there's also options for tuners and programmers, which are like a handheld and adjustable type unit. So a tuner, for example, you plug it in, you can set your tune, unplug it, put it in your glove box, or a programmer which you can mount up onto the dash and have access to all the time, have gauges and displays and everything that are right there in front of you. But what's great about these options is it opens up a lot of customization, a lot of manipulation that you can do, from things like shift points to your rev limiter to removing the top speed limiter. Lots of different unique and intricate settings to your engine that can be changed and modified and manipulated to make it so that way your vehicle is more precisely tuned for you and how you drive and how you want it to act. Another great feature to these is the option for preset or pre-customizable, but different levels of a tune, for example. So you could set up, say, a level 1 power tune, a level 2 power tune, and then a level 3 power tune for maximum horsepower, maximum performance when you need it, but then drop back down to the level 1 or level 2 when you're just around town and you want more power, but maybe not all the power that comes in that level 3 setting. There's also pre-done maps for fuel economy, like if you're, say, going on a long road trip and you really don't need maximum performance, but you'd like your truck or your car to be tuned for fuel economy. There's also towing and hauling settings if you've got a truck or an SUV. So these tuners, programmers, chips, there is a ton of functionality that's built into them, and it's all geared towards making your ride more specific and more tuned for you. Our next question is how to increase your horsepower. And this is also a really exciting question because there is so much that can be done to increase the horsepower in your vehicle. Now, to really dive deep on it, I also have a video, and there is also a blog attached to just this topic, the 7 best ways on how to increase your vehicle's horsepower and torque. So I'll link that in the description for even more detail. But to kind of go into all the different options on how to increase your horsepower, you have, just kind of off of on a list, you have a cold air intake system. You can get an upgraded and larger diameter throttle body. When you get to the exhaust, you can do high flow or high performance headers or manifolds, high flow catalytic converters, quality catback exhaust system. Further moving down the line, we have performance tuners and programmers. And when you really need that extra power, you can get boost, as in a supercharger or a turbo system. Now, all these different modifications, they all apply power, they all create power, and they all have their own unique features to your vehicle. Starting with the air intake system, it's a great and easy modification to do to get more horsepower out of your ride. They're relatively easy to install. In terms of the grand scheme of things, one of the lesser expensive parts that you can do, and they do great wonders for horsepower, they help your fuel economy, and you get a nice little sound from hearing the intake suck that air in. So that's a pretty cool one. Go into a larger diameter throttle body that works next in line from that air intake system. Kind of the same thing, pulls in more air, brings in more air, and allows more air, more oxygen-rich air to enter into your cylinder for combustion, dating back to the spark plugs. All this stuff kind of intertwines pretty well. With your exhaust, the headers, catalytic converters, the catback exhaust system, all of this is to scavenge and pull more power out of your engine. And the way that this is working is by evacuating all that air that you're bringing in. So like a cold air intake system and a larger diameter throttle body, their focus is to get more of that oxygen-rich air in. The headers, high flow cats, and catback exhaust, their purpose is to flow all that air back out. So if you're bringing a lot of air in, you want to get it all out smooth, quick, and efficient. And this is going to help keep your engine flowing strong and allow it to build more horsepower. Tuners and programmers, that was just the last question on this if you wanted to backtrack to it. But in a gist, it allows for tons of modification and tons of customization to the tuning of your vehicle. And that is all a great way to increase the horsepower and torque. And it doesn't change anything mechanically. You're modifying the electronics within the computer. You're modifying the tuning of your vehicle by going with a performance chip, a tuner, or a programmer. Now, lastly, and this makes the biggest difference in terms of adding more horsepower to your vehicle, but a supercharger or a turbo. And this is also called forced induction, and it's where you build boost. And the big thing here is going all the way back to the front with the air intake and the throttle body, for example. That focus is to bring more air in. What this is doing is it's basically pressurizing that air and forcing it into your engine, hence the forced induction. And what that does is allow for tremendous gains in terms of horsepower. I mean, there's vehicles out there with a supercharger or a turbo that can see up to 50% gains, and that's tremendous. So in terms of how to add horsepower, again, you have a cold air intake, large diameter throttle bodies, headers, manifolds, high flow cats, catback exhaust, tuners, programmers, and of course, again, forced induction being the best at making the most horsepower. Our next question is, what is wheel offset? Now this one is also really fun because you get to manipulate wheels and how they fit on your vehicle, and it pushes them out and pulls them in. And offset is a great measurement to understand. And that's the biggest thing that is hard to get at first, is that it's a measurement, not just a number. Now, what offset is where the hub mounting location is of your wheel in reference to the center line of the wheel. So for example, like the wheels on my truck, they have a 0 millimeter offset, which means that hub mounting platform is dead center in between the wheel. So if it's, yay wide, the hub mounting is dead center on it. Now what you can do here is play with it, like a positive offset, which will pull the wheels in, versus a negative offset, which pushes them out. But that's more for trucks. If you're on a car, oftentimes your offset's going to be a higher number to begin with. So like a lot of cars will have a factory offset of like positive 40 or positive 45 or positive 50. But it still works the same there in terms of the measurements and how the numbers play with it. So if your car, for example, has a positive 40 millimeter offset stock, and you want those wheels to stick out a little bit more, maybe give your car a little bit of poke, or maybe line it up with the fender nicely, you're gonna wanna go lower in terms of the number for offset. So if it's a positive 40 offset stock and you move to, say, a positive 30 offset, that's still a positive number, but it has now moved that wheel out by 10 millimeters, which is a little bit under 1/2 of an inch. So that makes a pretty darn noticeable difference when you're talking about wheels and fitment, especially on a car, because there's not as much room to work with in the wheel well there. When you get into wheels and wheel offset for trucks, for example, oftentimes it's still a positive offset from the factory. So a lot of trucks are coming with like a positive 20, a positive 30. Some of the newer trucks, like modern Tundras and modern F-150s, actually have very high positive offsets from stock. The Tundra, if I remember correctly, is about 50 or 60, and the F-150 I think is around 40 or 50 positive offset stock. So when you're picking out an aftermarket set of wheels, if you went with something that was, say, a 0 offset, that wheel's actually going to stick pretty far out from the wheel well. About 25 millimeters equates out to, say, an inch. So if your offset from stock is positive 50 and you've gone down to a 0, you've pushed that wheel out 2 inches already just on the offset. That doesn't even take into account the width of the wheel. So there is a lot of variables, a lot to take into consideration there. But once you start to understand that number of offset, that it's how far off center the hub mounting location is, it makes it so much easier to be able to visualize this. So if you went from a positive 50 to a positive 25, you've now moved that wheel out 1 inch. For most trucks, that sort of thing, moving the wheel out about 1 inch makes for a great look, about lines it up with the fender for most applications, and makes for a nice aggressive stance, gives you a little bit more room to fit a bigger tire if you've done a leveling kit or a lift kit. But for offset, that's the main point of it, is that it is how far off from the center that hub mounting platform is. So again, as you go higher in terms of the offset, so from a 0 to a 10 to a 20 to a 50, you're moving that hub mounting location closer to the face of the wheel, which then pulls that wheel more underneath your vehicle. The flip side of it, say go from a 40 to a 30 to a 20, 10, 0, negative 10, negative 20. As you move that offset lower, you're moving that hub mounting location more towards the back of the wheel, which is pushing your wheel out further out from underneath your vehicle. Because the hub on your vehicle never changes. That is a static part that stays in the same spot. By moving where the hub mounting location is in reference to the actual rim, the actual outer part of the wheel, that's what's moving it out or moving it in, since that hub mounting platform stays on the same spot on the car and you're manipulating it on the wheel. So that is wheel offset. Our last question is how to clean your headlights at home. Now this is really in reference towards when your headlights get fogged over or yellowed over. And to explain why this happens and how it happens is because on headlights there is a UV protectant coating. Now that UV protectant coating does not last forever. Unfortunately, it does degrade from the UV that it's protecting your headlights from. And that's why your headlights don't start to fog or yellow until several years down the road. It's not going to happen on a new car. It's not even going to happen in the first few years. It'll be more down the road. And that UV protectant layer getting fogged or yellowed is unfortunately just a side effect of it because we have plastic headlight lenses. The glass headlight lenses of the past are now a thing of the past. Now, what you can do to really clean them up and make them clear and make them look good again is there's a few different methods of how you can do this at home, like dish soap, vinegar, baking soda. There's several different methods. What I like to use is toothpaste. It's a little bit odd, like, back in the day you used to use toothpaste to clean scratches out of a CD. It's the same kind of a thing because toothpaste is really a polish. It's polish for your teeth. It cleans them and it polishes them, makes them look nice. It's a very fine grit basically that you're rubbing into your headlights. So you can smear over your whole headlight with this toothpaste, and with a soft cloth like a microfiber or a terry cloth, you want to do these small circles. You don't have to push very hard because you don't want to damage the plastic, but these small little circles to buff that toothpaste into your headlight lenses until it's all the way gone is a great way to restore that clear look. Now it's not going to last forever because again, that UV protectant coating, it's now gone or damaged, which is why they got fogged or yellowed to begin with. So by cleaning them up, you're just going to extend the life of your headlights, but inevitably they will need to be replaced. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Ask Auto Anything. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and sign up for our emails so you never miss a new one. Thank you for choosing AutoAnything.com.